Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing fine, and yes, this is the next part of What If Naruto repeat the Chunin exam, and this is also the end of season 1. When Naruto finds he is flung back in time and must repeat the entire Chunin exam over and over and over, until he gets it right and possibly saves Konoha in the bargain. So let's start with the story without any delay. So this is sand. Well, the border anyway. Really? What gave you that idea? Tamrai joked, as they all looked out over a line where trees stopped and desert began. Borders like this are chosen, as often as not, by natural boundaries as much as by political concerns or anything else. Fire was a very wet country to have so many trees, but the last river was actually quite a ways back from this stretch, and the warm, wet sea breezes that kept that land well watered were blocked by mountains and high elevation around here. The land of wind, where the village of sand was hidden, got its name for the fact that it had very little vegetation. During the day, sunlight heated up those suns, which in turn heated up the air. Hot air expanded, pushing out, and rose up, pulling in loads of air from all around. This movement of air was called wind. Then in the evenings when the sun went down, this phenomena reversed itself. Deserts can actually be very cold at night, and this chilled air contracted, pulling in, and lowered, pushing out air that had rushed in during the daytime, and in the process creating more wind. Large bodies of water or vegetation would have put a stop to that cycle and made the land far more pleasant and livable. So, because the land was the way it was, one knew beforehand it didn't have those things. Pretty much any place that had water also had life. That wind country was mostly made up of large stretches of barren wasteland, said that rain didn't reach there very well, and between that and the fact that the land was called wind, the rest of it followed from there. So, the trees of the land of fire faded out along those borders, replaced by swaths of dry grassy hills, which in turn gave way before desert suns. Looking out upon this was a large group of ninja, most of whom hailed from the land of fire, specifically the village of Konoha. Sakura, who'd asked the question, glared at Tamrai, who'd answered it. But the Sand Maiden was unrepentant, looking past her and frowning at Kakashi with his nose in a book full of smut, and Sasuke baiting her husband. Kuinai was there, along with Hinata, but so was Kiba, standing there in his fur-lined jacket with his dog Akamaru perched on his head. Shino stood behind. Tamrai knew for certain that after they got out on the desert, those two boys were going to bake in those heavy jackets they always wore. Perhaps it was time to introduce those two to t-shirts. It could save their lives. Guy stood there shouting about the triumph of youth, with Lee acting along and Neji lurking as an unhappy shadow behind them. Tenten had better things to do, and so was helping Naruto unseal more water from their packs. It was awkward, they had better canteens than this, but they couldn't use the good ones without revealing the seals they used to make them. And, if Naruto was revealed as a great sealing genius, it was unlikely for him to be allowed out of town at all, much less on a risky mission. Those seals were worth more to Konoha, or to any ninja village, than the risk of putting him on this mission was. Tamrai sighed, glancing over to her brothers. They'd never planned on inviting the extra Konoha ninja, or even her own family. This had been planned as a clan Kitsune-only event. But Anbu had caught them making preparations to leave town, and the Hokage had gotten involved asking questions, and the only excuse that would pull them out of a treason and desertion charge at that point was "We're going to go warn Sand that their Kazekage has been assassinated and replaced by an imposter." And, well, that turned this into a full A-rank mission with armed ninja escort. And what's worse, to get everyone they wanted in on this, they had to bring along all sorts of people they didn't want or need. It seemed to her as if half of Konoha was present. Fortunately, as this mission was vital to the security of Konoha, they'd been able to get all of their own people on board, but to get all 12 girls, 11 angels plus their den mother, they'd been forced to accept the escorting presence of their teams, instructors, and in some cases near total strangers. She had no idea what Abisu was doing along. And, worst of all in everyone's opinion, in order for Naruto to come along he had to be trailing all of Team 7, worthless blighters that they were, all of them up to and including their Chunin instructor, Naruto accepted, of course. Fortunately for everyone, Kakashibaka was not in charge. "All right, everyone, marching orders," Hana called out. Technically, Tsunade was in command of this group, but it took just a nudge for her to defer to the pack's alpha female, who used her authority wisely. "Naruto, we need an extreme perimeter, call it 1 mile out, make a ring with enough clones so they can see each other easily." "Right," the boy called out from the back of the massive tiger he was riding, and in a heat shimmer-like moment there were suddenly thousands of him, and thousands of his mount, Simba. The rest of the clan was still trying to figure out how he did that. He'd explained it several times, but making shadow clones of his mount was just how? There was, of course, a complete absence of puffs of smoke as they had appeared. Naruto was just way too good to leave any such traces anymore. Shifting on the back of her own tigress mount in the heat, Ino followed the example of some of the other girls and adjusted the seals on her clothing with a bit of chakra, and their color shifted to a leopard-spotted light tan, far better suited to hiding in a desert environment than the previous forest camouflage colors. They were working on seals that would adapt patterns automatically, but no breakthrough yet. Those would require environmental awareness out of seals, and that was something really hard to ask out of a scribble of ink on paper. Her teammates, Shikamaru and Choji, eyed her, her mount, and her costume for what had to be the 1000th time. "Don't say it," Ino warned. "I swear, if one of you says I'm troublesome again, I'm going to let Nala here play with you." And to punctuate that, she reached down and patted the muscled shoulder of her massive tigress. The cat chose that moment to yawn. Mounts of the Kitsune clan averaged about 12 feet long and 1,000 pounds, with all of the smooth, lean grace of successful predators. The fact that they wore their own carefully articulated armor was noted, as were the masses of razor-sharp, pointy teeth. "Arf!" Ino's puppy, Blondie, barked from her perch on top of the girl's head. So they had to memorize time dilation illusions to train them anew each reset. So what? Having pets was cool. And comforting. Shikamaru lowered his head to rub the bridge of his nose. You could tell he was actually trying to suppress the urge to say troublesome, as the lazy genius could guess that tigers, and dogs, had good hearing, and those claws looked sharp. Choji had less tact, and blurted out through a mouthful of potato chips, "I still want to know where you got all of your cool stuff. I traded sex for ninja equipment and training, how's that?" The girl shouted aloud, annoyed beyond endurance by their nagging. Conversation stopped in the rest of the camp as people turned to look at her. Those with analytical ability sweat dropped as they stared around at the large number of girls similarly outfitted, 12, to be precise, and came to conclusions of their own. "Hey, Choji. I could make you armor and stuff if you want," Naruto called back. "Why didn't you say anything?" Looking amazingly disgusted, Choji quickly sputtered that was unnecessary, and quickly ran off to hide. Moving on, Hana smoothly interrupted this scene. "Inside the outer ring we'll need a pair of patrols circling to make sure no one gets past. Since..." Here she made a brave attempt to avoid sniggering, trying hard to conceal her smile, Since the Sharingan is undefeatable, Kakashi and Sasuke can take opposite routes circling the main group. That way they can tell if any illusion using ninja break past our perimeter. The amazing thing was, Hana actually kept a straight face until the two lazy and arrogant Sharingan donkeys went off to assume their patrol routes. It was only after they were gone that the 12 girls plus Naruto all broke out laughing. I don't get it. What's so funny? Kiba asked, with his hands in his pockets. Since Hinata was laughing too hard to speak clearly, or even breathe properly, Kuinai took pity on him to explain. The duty Hana just assigned is the worst in the whole company. The outer perimeter clones only have to get in position, then they move at the same speed as we do. However, to do a patrol circling the main group, those two will have to be moving several times as fast as the rest of us. And it is miserable and exhausting work, keeping up that pace, especially over dry and dusty desert terrain. Hinata overcame her amusement momentarily, enough to elaborate, plus, as counter-stealth agents they have to be fairly stealthy themselves, so a sneaky intruder wouldn't know how to avoid them. So it's even more work. Yosh! Guy cried out, striking a pose, teeth glinting as he smiled. Such a patrol makes for a great workout. Lee. We should go and assist them in this arduous duty. Hold on, Hana interrupted. I'm counting on you two to take over after those lazy bums get exhausted. Patrols may be difficult labor, but they've still got to be done, and we'll need someone fresh to take over when they get fatigued. Then she smirked. I don't think those two will last very long. You can think of it as a competition with them, if you like. Count yourself superior to them if you can do a longer patrol than they do without wearing yourselves out. Yosh! The eerie thing was, people could see the flames burning in Lee and his teacher's eyes. Right now I need you two to summon some turtles for the rest of us to ride on. The Inuzuka RS finished simply. But I have sworn not to use any chakra techniques in the presence of my faithful student, so as not to discourage his quest to become a great ninja without the use of chakra. Guy shouted. Did we forget that? I'm sorry. Shitsune interrupted her conversation with Choji and walked over to Lee. We've known how to fix those chakra coils of his for, well, it seems like forever. The idea was Naruto's, but any of us can do it now. Here you go. She applied both hands to the stunned youth, and in a couple of glowing seconds, he was feeling most strangely. And to cap that off, she stopped herself before mentioning the time dilation illusion specifically, just applying the technique to the boy and giving him a recorded year or so of chakra training in 2 minutes. Surprisingly, the rest of the camp was still and silent as she did this. Naruto had trained Lee this way in person enough times to have memorized their entire year of training together. And to avoid having to live it out over and over again, had simply copied that pattern into one stable illusion he could use or apply at need. Then he'd taught that to his angels. Yosh! The newly invigorated Lee shouted out moments later, before forming a hand seal and blasting out a pair of fireballs. Shitsune smiled as Guy and Lee hugged each other, shouting and crying aloud in their joy over this event. So, Lee has a fire affinity. Asuma casually sidled up to Kuinai and asked, hoping to strike up a conversation and wondering why she'd been so cold and distant to him recently. Not naturally, no, she spoke more for the benefit of her genin team, Hinata being the obvious exception, as she already knew all of this. His affinity is actually lightning. Teaching himself fire techniques is a great deal of work. But hard work is what Guy and Lee excel at, Hinata added primly. They like it. And considering how often they talk about the flames of youth, it's hard to see Lee not going to the effort of mastering fire techniques. Kuinai was nodding, making sure her genin overheard her. As far as I am concerned, given the way he trains, Lee with chakra would probably be the strongest genin. So strong it would be impossible for him to stay a genin for very long. Promotions are certain to come quickly for him. Kiba jerked as if stung, then pondered. Meanwhile, Guy produced the turtle summoning scroll, and it was with great ceremony that he permitted Lee to sign it, gaining the ability to produce those summons. It was a landmark event. Summons numbered among the most powerful and versatile of ninja techniques, and that reminded Kuinai to make sure to get her husband working on some scheme to get his baker teacher to hand over the dog summoning contract to the Inuzuka clan, who'd actually use it more than the incredibly lazy porn-addicted loser ever would. No reason at all not to have those summons used by a clan who'd love and appreciate them. And it would make Konoha stronger to hand that scroll over to a clan, rather than rot in the grip of a jonin who had to be compelled to make any effort at all. Being precious, and also personal as well as highly secret and restricted, no one could order Kakashi to surrender the scroll, even if he retained the right to use the summons. But she was confident Naruto could think of a way to get him to hand that over voluntarily. Besides, being dog lovers, it only made sense to grant the Inuzuka ability to use dog summons, as all of their clan techniques built on that relationship, so both they and the summons would be stronger for it. Kakashi had stolen some Inuzuka clan techniques for exactly that purpose. Kuinai had to admit that, having Kiba as her student, she wanted to see him do well. Not to mention that she could expect the gratitude of the clan alpha female out of this, if it worked, as Hana was an Inuzuka too. Inwardly, she resolved to develop a variant of Naruto's give Lee a year of chakra training illusion for teaching Kiba, and perhaps Shino, how to use a summoning technique. Then she came to ground on the fact that she couldn't do a summons either, and was surprised that they, as a clan, hadn't addressed that yet. Actually, she did know of one, no, make that three, who used summons in the clan. Naruto typically got toads, although she had no idea if he'd gotten that ability this reset or not. Tsunade was the legendary slug summoner, and her summons, while kind of icky, were also very nice once you got to know them, but there was also Tamrai. She'd have to ask the Sand Maiden about her weasel summons, as that might be something she'd want to explore. Weasels weren't icky, and they were surprisingly ferocious for their size. Besides, some of them fought snakes, and that had all sort of possibilities. Kuinai left a pondering Asuma's side to go mention her idea to Anko. Lunchtime. Hana called out over the procession. Sakura started out of her thoughts. She'd been staring, pale and scared, at Ino, her former friend, wanting but not daring to ask if she'd been serious about what she said about sleeping around in exchange for ninja training. When they'd started out on this desert trek hours ago, Guy and Lee had summoned up a trio of enormous tortoises. Tenten had then produced tents out of her storage scrolls and set them up as howdahs on those broad, smooth backs, where they'd been resting out of the sun while the turtles crossed the sands for them. At their size, larger than most houses, the tortoises actually walked pretty fast, and with their broad, flat feet they weren't troubled by the hot sand in the least. So it was an amazingly fun and comfortable way to travel across what would otherwise have been a very difficult terrain. The unmounted tigers had made a point of lazing about in feline indolence, looking, as cats often do, bonelessly comfortable under those tents on the backs of the shells of the big reptiles. But Sakura had noticed hardly any of it. "Go ahead and ask. I know you want to," Ino told her, without looking at her. Sakura gave a guilty start, then mustered her courage. Was it true, what you said? True, but misleading. Ino admitted. I actually married a strong ninja, and he gave me techniques and training. I made it sound bad so my teammates would stop bugging me, and wouldn't ask how they could do it too. True to form, Sakura blurted out what was, to her, the most obvious conclusion. Pointing a finger at the blonde, she shouted, there is no way you could have married Sajuke-kun. Sajuke, nursing burns on the soles of his feet from hot sand having gotten in those sandals he wore on the patrol they'd run, looked up along with the rest at this proclamation. Ino tossed her hair angrily and huffed, standing up to put hands on her hips and shout back at Sakura, since everyone would be listening anyway. I never said I did. In fact, get this through your amazingly thick skull, I don't want to marry that pathetic loser. Don't you dare bring Naruto into this. The pinkette shouted back. He has nothing to do with. Slap. Ino withdrew her hand from Sakura's cheek, now actually mad. I'm married to Naruto, you tit. He has everything to do with this. Sajuke is the bastard I call a pathetic loser. And why? Because he is. Do you know how much extra, secret training it took during his time at the academy to get those grades of his? Or that he'd know more than 30 ninja techniques if only he'd ever bothered to read the scrolls people gave him as presents? He's an ass, and as lazy as his teacher. Both of them are utterly pathetic wastes of flesh. Don't hold back, tell us how you really feel, Tamrai joked from her position, lounging on cushions under the shade. The ridiculousness of that statement caused laughter around the tents, and put a halt to Sakura's urge to get violent in defense of her Sajuke. You know what my clan techniques are, all of you. Ino addressed the crowd. I've been in the Uchiha's head, and you know what? Sajuke's mind is nothing more nor less than a container of filth. The girl put on her boots. He's a totally spoiled, stuck-up bastard who literally has never thought of anyone but himself. I'm not going in there again if I can help it. Sakura sputtered, but Sajuke glared at the blonde girl across the carpets. Oh, now the great Uchiha genius is going to sulk. Ino mocked, adjusting the straps on her armor. You may think you're giving us the silent treatment, but really you're just going to pout. Growling at her, the Uchiha got up to flounce off to where he could pout in private. Although his dramatic exit was spoiled as many of those girls broke out laughing over his attempt at a glowering departure. Breaking off of her own laughter, Hana called, Okay, princess, if you want to run off to cry alone you can do something useful at the same time. You and Kakashi can take over running patrols again. Kakashi looked up from where he'd been nursing blisters on the soles of his own feet, his one exposed eye glaring at Ino for causing a scene that got him put back on that duty so fast. Sakura was still nursing a red handprint on her cheek in shock. Ino turned to glare at her over a shoulder and huff. I married Naruto, and he taught me everything I know about how to be a more effective ninja. He's had to lie, cheat and steal to get his ninja abilities, hiding them all the while from his teacher, who does everything possible to hold him back, but Naruto is one of the most effective shinobi Konoha has, and I'm proud of him. Kiba looked up to Kyoinai, trusting his teacher and disturbed that anyone couldn't trust theirs. Kakashi didn't really try to hold Naruto back, did he? Kyoinai had to resist the urge to sigh, folding her arms to answer. The day they became a team, Kakashi took the other two away to celebrate becoming a team, and left Naruto tied up, yelling for help. While they probably thought it was funny, they'd only passed the exercise for teamwork. And what kind of message does that send about helping your teammates? The dog boy looked sick, nor was he the only one shocked by that revelation. Hinata was nodding firmly. Kakashi only ever taught his team one exercise, basic tree climbing. During the practice, Sakura didn't improve at all. Since she had good control, her teacher should have given her the next exercise, or had her work on something else, not just sit around. But Kakashi didn't care about her progress enough to do so. The Hyuga heiress raised her chin up and declared. In fact, I think Kakashi only taught them tree climbing solely to help Sasuke. Sakura didn't improve from it, and Naruto's control was so bad tree climbing was too advanced for him, so he should have been started with a simpler exercise. Naruto wouldn't have improved if he weren't so determined, and hadn't had the stamina to keep going far beyond where most would quit. Sasuke was the only one that should have improved from the tree climbing exercise. Looking at it in that context, Kakashi likely thought Sakura would do it easily, making Sasuke want to improve, and Naruto would fail miserably, restoring Sasuke's confidence. Several of the Jonin present gazed at the not yet departed copy ninja with looks of shocked abhorrence. Somebody, no one could tell who, muttered, "What a bastard." Tenten folded her arms and added her part to this. Another thing, right after we finished the second exam. Kakashi, knowing Naruto was alone his whole life, had poor skills, and really needed help, specifically told him, "You asked me first, but I'd rather train Sasuke. Go with a different teacher." For a totally isolated person, to be so rejected by one of his few precious people would be terrible. And then he pawned him off on an instructor that hated him. You'd have to be a total scumbag to do that. Some have tried to make excuses as to why Kakashi did it, but I don't really buy any of them. Kakashi took his student and slunk off to do patrols quickly before the public embarrassment got any worse. They were not sorry to see him go. Several eyes then tracked over to Naruto, who shrugged. Our team was doomed from the moment it was created. Our teacher doomed us by being too stuck on his past to care about the present. It didn't help that I was an attention-starved orphan. Then we were doomed by a fangirl so mindlessly obsessive about her crush she couldn't see anything else, like how pathetic her own skills were as she walked ignorantly into deadly peril with stars in her eyes, not even noticing the danger, and by Sasuke, who in some ways had all of the flaws of each of the others. He was lost in his past, preened under the attention, and so focused on something, in his case revenge, that he couldn't see anything else. Our only teamwork was to all be dysfunctional together. Tsunade gave a shrug, effectively ending that conversation. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. Guy was having a great time, busy torturing Kakashi's eardrums about his eternal rival having lost the contest of who could stay on patrol longer as the group broke from their travel routine and made camp for the night. Lee was, not coincidentally, having the same fun teasing Sasuke over his same loss on the exact same subject. The geniuses of hard work had done more patrols over a longer time and been better off afterwards than the duo with the unbeatable bloodline. In fact, the difference between the two was amazing, with the hard workers having done several times as much, while being better off at the end of it. Facts that the bloodline geniuses were not enjoying hearing, or having paraded about the camp. Of course, that was far from the only thing happening in so large a group. So, the Yamanaka on your team is married to the dead last. Did you know about this? Neji approached Choji to ask. You mean you didn't? Yugao, who'd been lurking nearby, blurted. I thought everyone knew. I mean, they had a beautiful wedding. She touched her lip, considering. Come to think of it, I didn't see either of you there. Actually, they had been, they just wouldn't remember that. Yugao, as den mother, had the job of averting all kinds of suspicion. And I wouldn't call him dead last shit soon, who'd been stirring some stew, also thought to throw in. After sipping a bit to taste the flavor, she added some cloves, while still talking. I mean, he's not perfect, virtually any Jonin, even many Chunin, could beat him one-on-one. But that's the trick, they'd never be able to face him in a one-on-one fight. Naruto comes in only one size, thousands. Konoha has had several legendary ninja Kyuinai joined this conversation and nodded. The three Sanin, the Professor, the White Fang, Yellow Flash, Copycat, but someday soon we'll all be ranking the Orange Swarm among the rest of them. Asuma, Kakashi, Ibisu and other Jonins or special Jonins listening in gave each other significant looks, wondering where this support had come from. You're up. Hana called, inadvertently breaking this conversation. We're dry and dusty, so the quicker the better. Several heads actually turned to look in on this. They were indeed dry and dusty despite the relative ease of their desert trip and, since the obvious assumption was that, having brought a cook along, she was going to cook something, in spite of Tsunade having claimed her as a second apprentice, they were all ninja, and knew that rules could be bent in order to bring a little extra comfort along. Instead, the ramen chef's daughter walked out to a decent stretch of clear sand not too far away and started forming hand seals. Eyebrows went up all around as the never a ninja before cast an earth technique, causing the sand to fall away, shrinking as spaces between grains vanished, and it collected into large stones, then boulders, and finally created a wide yet irregular pit about 3 to 4 feet deep on average. This looked pathetically useless to the experienced ninja as a combat technique, but they heard murmurs of approval from the various girls around camp. Sand to clay. Called out as her next technique, sealing up many of the cracks in between boulders with material that would absorb more than drain away. The male Jonin were still puzzled. It didn't create any sort of defensible wall, it looked useless as a trap. Then Tenten unsealed several thousand gallons of water and they were looking at a hot spring bath. The eyes of unaligned girls went wide and they began drooling. You men can go see to the tents, or something. Hana waved those with a Y chromosome off. We ladies are going to get the sand out of our hair. Naruto. Tsunade called out as she loosened her collar. Can you give us a wall? Let's not forget, there are perverts about who would probably try peeping. I'd do it myself but none of the rest of us have mastered your trick of the roses. Right. The boy darted forward, already forming a hand seal. Out of the ground rose up a dome of crystalline rock completely covering the spring. The rock dome was thick enough to survive a substantial pounding, able to pass light, but not clear enough to see any detail through. What made it most interesting was that the dome's entire outer surface was covered in very detailed, very lifelike carvings of roses, comprising a mass of needle-sharp, spiky thorn vines that, despite ninja being able to walk on such surfaces, none of them would want to as it would tear their feet to bloody rags. Thus, those bathers within could be assured of their privacy, as no one should be willing to peek in any of the ventilation ducts above, and those had bendy curves within the couple feet of rock, so they couldn't be seen directly through even by perverts sufficiently motivated to not care about their feet getting sacrificed in service to their hormones. And, though it wasn't obvious at present, the nature of the crystal was aligned in such a way that those within could see out almost clearly, while almost blocking the view from out to in. Upon entering, every girl looking at it felt that every hot spring resort ought to have such a feature as that dome of rock. The girls almost immediately began to file inside the arched entryway. Dash. Ah. I love a good soak at the end of a day. Total heaven. Sakura cried out happily to a Chunin she didn't know. It would have been unfair, the female portion of the group shirking out on responsibilities to bathe, but each of the clan Kitsune girls had, after a very brief scrub, made a shadow clone and sent that off to help with camp chores like cooking and setting up latrines and so on. Although, really, with the right jutsu, none of those tasks took very long. Of course, that delay caused those girls to be last into the spring to soak, and that left Sakura facing a parade of bottoms, all of them with property of Naruto Uzumaki penned on them, most of them in the girl's own hand. The pinkette was having a terribly difficult time not dying from the shock. Remember, Naruto, don't be a stranger. One of those girls called out the bath entrance to the blushing blonde boy, who had tons of eyes from the male ninja on him, none of them quite believing what they were hearing and wondering, in an analytical sort of way, if he'd actually be going. Yeah, our master can enter our bath anytime. Another giggled. Naruto was having a difficult time deciding what to do. Most of the busy work outside in camp was now done. They had a short defensive wall around the camp. The summons had disappeared, and the cloth and canvas tents that many of the older Jonin and Chunin packed had proved entirely unnecessary, as he'd gone about, using earth techniques to compress sand into little stone igloos, mostly buried by the rest of the sand. They had steps down to a front entrance, which could be covered by a trapdoor, and 2 emergency exits, with basic furnishings inside, and were more comparable to decent hotel rooms than camping. Dust the place with a fairly thin coat of sand and you'd never even know the huts were there, until ninja came swarming out like trapdoor spiders. The camp had a pair of towers so lookouts could see afar off. The latrines were dug and had their own outbuildings, complete with half-moons on the doors. It really resembled more of a semi-permanent trading settlement than a one-night camp, but all it had taken was a little chakra to pull off. All this required nowhere near the amount of work he was used to, actually. Their clan compound took an amazing amount of labor to get right. The buried stone huts were set for single occupancy for Chunins or Jonin, and double for Genin. But none of his girls would be staying in them. They had a fairly substantial above-ground manor house complete with balconies and individual bedrooms, all nicely arranged. The stone of the building had been done by him and furnished by them out of ceiling scrolls. And the master bedroom had a little fox face on the door, reading Naruto under the plaque, something that had caused bug eyes from Kakashi and Sasuke when they'd seen it, touring the main house. But, hey, he was the one who'd built it. Figuring that he wouldn't even be able to sleep in his own room if he didn't face up the wondering eyes now on him, Naruto went to the door, which had a U-shaped bend so that no one could see right through, although they could hear just fine, and called in, "Knock, knock. Do you mind if I come in?" "Naruto!" Sakura shouted out, her face turning bloody red. "How dare you even suggest such a thing?" "News flash, we invited him," Ino told her coldly. "One moment please," Hana called back out the entrance, before turning to the girls within. "All right ladies, naked bathing is now over. Put on a suit if you have something you'd rather the men not be seeing. Otherwise thank you for your stay, but we can't afford to let our male ninja drop in fighting ability because of sand getting in their clothes and chafing away their skin." Turning back to the entrance, Hana called, 5 minutes. Virtually all of the ladies present simply touched rings and were dressed in modest one-piece bathing suits of opaque fabric, complete with short skirts. Their husband had no need to go leering at them through skimpy suits, and they had no desire at all to show off for anyone else. 1 or 2 girls not from the Kitsune clan got dressed and left. But, I don't have a swimsuit. Sakura sank into the water, turning pale. I didn't think I'd need one, out in a desert. You have 2 options, Hana told her. Borrow one, or leave the bath. The men deserve a chance to get clean also, and we didn't bring enough water to create 2 springs. Although, mentally, that was getting earmarked for the next trip, and by more girls than just Hana. Seeing she was alone as nude and about to leave, Sakura turned to one of the other girls for support. I don't suppose you. Kin took pity on her and threw her a yellow bikini, saying, Here. Thank you. The pinkette cried gladly. When she was halfway into it, the sound Kunoichi replied. It's no problem. I didn't get a chance to use it in the kinky sex games I'd planned for it. Sakura froze in place with a grimace on her face. 1 minute till the boys come in. Everyone, clear out the north side. Hana prompted, secretly enjoying the pinkette's agony. We don't want any hands to wander underwater. Hinata, could you set up a screen? Without rising from the water, the Hyuga heiress formed a hand seal and did so, forming a thin wall of dirt between the 2 sides of the bath. On seeing that it was only a privacy screen, just taller than a man and not very much of a barricade, Sakura hurried into her borrowed swimsuit, getting the last strap on right before a few tentative male faces poked in. A clone of Hana left the waters to stand by the entrance, telling all. Boys to the north side, girls to the south. No shared pools. No groping. Then the Chunin pretended not to notice as Shitsune and Anko reached out from behind her and grabbed Naruto, dragging him back into the girls' side. What? Sakura called out in disbelief this was allowed to happen. All in favor of Naruto on the girls' side. Ino called out, raising her hand. Every female hand went up, aside from Sakura, whose hair bugged out, particularly as she stared at the Chunin who'd been so busy making sure no shenanigans occurred, and had her hand raised. I'm sorry, did you not see this? Hana, bottom safely pointed away from the men, lifted the back of her skirt to showcase to the girl property of Naruto Uzumaki penned in permanent ink on her flank. Don't be a spoil sport or I'll ask for the loaned suit back, Kin teased. Red-faced, Sakura sank down into the water. Tenten smirked. They had no need to tell the girl that suit shrunk every time the phrase itsy bitsy, teeny weeny, yellow polka dot bikini was sung in its presence. No way had she earned the privilege. Now there was not a woman, living or dead, that did not know where she stood in her own social circle. Those social circles could be large and strong, or small and weak, anything in between and then some. They could be static or fluid, and they could even change to which circle they belonged, but a girl always knew her position in the pecking order, who could snub whom and so on. Sakura, to her great astonishment, found herself dead last. Now it has, on occasion, happened before that someone outmaneuvers someone else to displace them. The workings of female social orders are as active with plots and positioning and the carrying on of campaigns as units in World War II. It was a ceaseless activity. But rarely was there an upset as complete as Sakura was experiencing. She'd known her position, and it had always been a fairly high one, since the day Ino befriended her, at any rate. She had been a leader among the girls in her academy class, and a leader among Sajuke's fangirls after that. Having enjoyed high positions in those clubs she'd chosen for her own before this, it came as quite a shock to her to be among Kunoichi who snubbed her as a matter of routine. These girls, these ninja, had no use for her opinions and wouldn't back her plays. She was an outcast, and had no idea how she'd gotten there. These were her peers. Since becoming a ninja, she'd left the civilian social circles she'd once belonged to. Her high academy grades and closeness to one of the rising elite young ninja had always before guaranteed her a high place in the esteem of her fellow kunoichi in her age range. This in turn had granted her confidence, and some feeling of authority. Now, instead of esteem, they brushed her off like she didn't exist. And when she called for support to react to those snubs, it simply didn't appear. She was the dead last, back to where she'd been before Ino befriended her. On realizing her position, that her peers had no use for her in their circle at all, the young girl excused herself to run off and cry in her hut in the ground. Any girl that rejected by her own social group basically no longer belonged to it, and had to go find some other group with which to belong. She was devastated. After the baths, it was time for dinner, and the tables glittered under an array of fine dishes. There were gasps of awe, long periods of stunned and reverent silence, and not a few people fainting or breaking out crying upon first sampling the food. It was that good. I had thought I had eaten the best meal of my life when we had lunch upon the backs of our shelled friends. Guy shouted aloud to the group, holding a spoon aloft in the air, a bowl in the other hand. But that was nothing compared to the banquet that has greeted us tonight. Spinning around, the Jonin knelt before the Sanin's first apprentice, saying, "Shit soon. The fires of youth burn brightly within you. Your cooking is a feast fit for emperors. Will you marry me?" Silly, the girl waved him away. "I'm glad you like the food, but I only made a stew to feed our tigers. You haven't even eaten my cooking. Besides, I am already married, see." And she showed off a large and glittering, jewel-encrusted ring. "I am." The green-clad Jonin jumped to his feet and spun around. "Already married?" The girl showed off her ring, also giggling. "Besides, I was too busy soaking in our tub to cook this evening." Bakey, ever security-conscious instructor of the sand team, showed concern, stopping before he lifted his own spoon to his lips. "Then who cooked it?" Unspoken was the message, "If we don't know, it could have been anyone, even an enemy, and having an enemy prepare your food is death." Eyes darted around in an instant of uncertainty before Tsunade broke through the rising panic to state, "It was Naruto. He always has spare clones available. Besides, he likes to pamper us. Did someone call my name?" The boy poked his head out of the big kitchen, wearing an apron and chef's hat, a stirring spoon in his hand. "If not, I'd best be getting back to my batter if you want to have the cakes and pies on time for dessert." And with that, he vanished. Kakashi and Asuma stood shoulder to shoulder as they approached Tsunade, who was the official leader of this expedition, even if she let her secretary Hana handle most of the day-to-day. "Honorable Tsunade, we request special permission to jointly escort Naruto back to Konoha. His cooking skills present far too valuable a strategic resource to be allowed to fall into enemy hands." Tsunade groaned, dropping her head into her hands. First his tailoring and clothing designs, then his seals, and now his cooking. It was getting real annoying having to hide Naruto's skills from the rest of the village, lest they pull him off of ninja duties. Besides, once he had to start concealing something, that limited how much he could improve on it, and how much they got to enjoy it. And she'd grown truly fond of Naruto's cooking. He'd really improved since the weddings, and giving that up even if only in public, was going to be a hardship at the very least. Denied. She told the duo, and before they could object, added, "How else am I going to eat his cooking for the rest of this trip?" The two Jonin looked at each other, silently agreeing with her reasoning. They wouldn't want to be without those sterling meals, either. In the background, making a play for recovered status by drawing on her most reliable standby, Sakura approached Naruto with a bowl in her hands and a smile on her face. "This is really excellent cooking, Naruto," she told him brightly. "Thanks." The boy brushed her aside dismissively, hurrying off to other tasks that held his real attention. Behind him, Sakura stood crushed, eyes wide. She'd always been able to rely on him for approval when she needed it. And complimenting him like that was supposed to trigger a flood. Instead, she got brushed aside as though she were meaningless. Sakura was devastated. He'd gotten away from her. She didn't know how, or when it had happened, but she had lost him. Her attempt to reel him back had come too late, and she'd missed all of the danger signs of his approaching separation. She felt shame as she realized it had been too late to keep him before she'd even thought to try. What had she done? Had she been so terrible? Except, well, maybe she had. Looking back on it, she couldn't recall the last time she'd said or done something nice for the blonde-haired boy. She hadn't wanted to encourage him, but suddenly she realized that he'd become her foundation. He'd been her one constant, a never-ending source of affection bearing her up no matter how life got her down, her ace in the hole against Ino, and something to cheer her up every time Sasuke turned her down, and now she had truly lost him. She couldn't put to words how much that hurt, or how scary it was to find herself cut free of that support, to suddenly find herself adrift in the world having to face all of the little hurts and Sasuke's rejections on her own. With a bite out of her heart she realized Naruto hadn't even been calling her Sakura-chan. It had always annoyed her before, but now, she missed it. Naruto's loyalty had been the one thing she could always count on in her life, and now, she simply didn't have it. That hurt her beyond the ability of words to express. The girl ran off to her hut to be alone, suddenly having no appetite in spite of the glorious nature of the food. A certain pink-haired kunoichi lay sprawled miserably upon her bunk, alone in her underground hut that was built for two. All of the other girls had places to be, and people to be with, and she had nothing. It was the most miserable experience of her young life. But, having already cried herself to sleep over it, her tears now came more silently as she lay or huddled there, unaware of even what time it was. It was probably sometime in the morning, but light didn't reach down there very well, and she'd closed the trapdoor over her steps when she'd gone in to be alone last evening, so it could still be night. She neither knew nor cared at that point, too empty to feel anything. Women define the value of their existence by the relationships they had to others as much as men defined their value by their accomplishments, and it had come to Sakura in one catastrophic moment last night that she had no one. Only, well, maybe, perhaps she had Sasuke. She was closer to him than anyone, although that wasn't saying much. It also didn't help her as she pictured Naruto doting on all of those other girls, how tenderly he'd treated them and how close they'd all seemed to him, all the while going over those memories thinking that could have been me. The steps of camp patrols had woken her. Sometime during the night a breeze had swept a fine layer of sand over her bolt hole and now the path taken by the ninja walking past on guard went practically right over her door. "Hey Sasuke," she heard someone call faintly, just outside her door. The steps of whoever was on patrol stopped. "What is it?" came the voice of her crush, and Sakura, realizing that it had been Sasuke walking past her hut who knows how long, began to hurriedly pull herself together, checking her clothes and washing her face, checking her face in the mirror and being appalled, but realizing that she had to take this chance or truly have nothing. I was wondering if you'd seen Sakura, the other voice continued, and she recognized it as Kiba. She ran off during dinner and no one's seen her since. So what? The Uchiha did not hear the sound of a tender heart breaking as he petulantly asked the heartless question. Well, dude, Kiba continued, she is a ninja of Konoha. We're supposed to care if one of them runs off or gets killed or something. Sasuke snorted disdainfully. She'll never matter. All she can do is delay us. Dude, that's cold. Don't you even care for her a little bit? No. Why should I? There came a scattered tinkling of little shattered heart pieces falling to the ground below them, but neither boy noticed. Well, she is hanging off you all the time. I can tell she likes you. The dog user touched his nose in confidence. She's weak. The Uchiha bitterly returned. The weak don't matter. The only thing I care about is getting revenge on my brother. Yeah, I heard about that, Kiba challenged, upset by the other boy's cold and heartless words. One could even imagine the boy folding his arms. But didn't you have another goal, that of reviving your clan? What are you going to do about that? Doesn't matter. First I must kill Itachi. And then what? Kiba asked. What are you going to do? How do you plan to revive your clan? Screw yourself. Then I will find someone strong. Yeah, well, news flash, if she's not in our age group, she'll probably not be interested. And the available pool of ninja-trained girls our age just thinned out as Naruto grabbed like half of them. Sakura's probably the strongest one left that has any interest in you. I don't care for her a bit, but you should. She's your best chance to find any willing piece of tail in Konoha. If I can't find a strong kunoichi in Konoha, I'll go elsewhere. One could hear the hackles go up in Kiba's voice. Dude, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Go missing ninja. Just to find a willing broad you think is strong enough for you. You're sick. If strength's all you're after, why don't you train up someone to a level you'd like, huh? Loyalty was very important to the Inuzuka, and Sasuke just openly displayed an appalling lack of it. In fact, he'd just admitted to the opposite. People like Sakura will never be strong, Sasuke returned, uncaring of the ire he caused in the other genin by this response. Yeah, well, listen to this, there is only one kind of strength that matters, Uchiha. And that is loyalty. If your brother had it, you'd not be such a waste case now. You'd still have your clan. But you've just shown you're every bit as disloyal to us as he was to you. You just watch yourself, Uchiha. You step 1 foot out of line and I'll be there ready to take you down. There then came the sound of steps as Kiba stomped off. Naruto. The named boy looked up out of the midst of the girls he was playing with in the largest pool of the spring. It being morning, and all the necessary bathing having been taken care of last night, the screen had gone down and it was back to girls only, Naruto excepted. Sakura was standing there in the door, and she looked like death had tossed her back for not being up to its standards. But, for all of that, she was trying to put on a brave face, and was wearing the yellow bikini Kin had loaned her the other night. Yes? He asked solemnly, somehow disturbed by her appearance. Even the girls had stopped laughing and joking around as the wreck of a shattered girl walked down into and through the water, before stopping close to the boy. The girl's breath caught in her throat, and she started again, picking apart the knot holding her top closed to open it before Naruto, showing him her small breasts. I would like to trade sex for training. Naruto gaped up into her face before looking desperately around his angels, not knowing what to do. But they were every bit as surprised as he was. Sakura swallowed, but held her face as happy and pleading as she could make it. Inside her head, inner Sakura was shouting aloud for the success of their shared plan, namely, to become the strongest Kunoichi in their village, and then spurn the Uchiha's advances. Inner Sakura was already practicing on a line-drawing dummy of the Uchiha, grinding her heel into the tied-up effigy's crotch. Entry into that particular club is for life, Sakura Tsunade said from where she was relaxing, using guarded tones. Whatever answer the pinkette might have given got cut off as a massive explosion rent the camp. The bulk of reader response can be summed up as follows: go with the muse. She's done a fine job so far. Sandstorms out on a windy desert were nothing serious. Well, no, that must be restated. They could and did kill those caught out in them, could appear with no warning, and even the natives feared them. What really ought to be said is that they are fairly common. Especially on a desert named for its strong winds. Now if you were in charge of a ninja village out in the middle of that mess, you couldn't just pull all of your patrols and guards back every time one happened, you couldn't afford to. For one, they appeared regularly, but with no notice beforehand, so travel time after seeing but before being caught in one was virtually nil. For another, no one could tell how long they would last, and they disappeared as quickly as they started. But more importantly, being a ninja village, you couldn't afford to go pulling your guards in and out all of the time. It made for moments of weakness. Travel times to and from their posts, even despite body flickers, made for openings through your defenses that spies or infiltrators or even entire well-positioned armies could take advantage of. So they simply couldn't do that. On the other hand, they couldn't afford to lose guards to the sandstorms, either. If they were good enough to protect the village on that serious duty, they were too valuable to throw away on environmental whims. The hidden village of sand could not be defended if their own weather kept killing their guards, or preventing them from having any. And you had to have guard nets and patrols far out into the desert to give you any kind of effective warning. If they were just an instant body flicker away from home, then so was your enemy before they'd noticed him. And that simply wouldn't do, your guards had to give you more warning than that. And to do that right, they had to be immune to the danger of sandstorms. They couldn't stop the sandstorms from happening, of course. That would require weather manipulation on a large scale, something beyond all ninja. So the alternative was for them to be able to survive them without danger. Thus, techniques had been born to let them do so. So it had been the first Kazekage who'd buckled down to deal with the problem, getting his best seal or jutsu experts together until they had a solution, and they did come up with one. In fact, they came up with several. Need inspires invention, and they really couldn't have settled that area in the first place without an answer to those problems. It just wasn't suited to a ninja village otherwise. With such an answer, however, it became extremely defensible. Oh, yes, extremely so. Because what was, until then, a liability, became an advantage. Orochimaru had decided that his new body with its eyes running around in the center of a desert was too tempting a prize to resist. However strong that group was, it was still smaller than Konoha itself, and less well defended. More importantly, it was not dedicated to protecting the prize Orochimaru wanted, the body and Sharingan eyes of one Sasuke Uchiha. No, the poor, deluded creatures were under the impression they were there to defend one of his defectors, an insignificant and disposable Kunoichi. The snake Chunin had the security of Konoha compromised in ways that not even the resets had allowed Clan Kitsune to defeat. They had never managed to find all of his spies. So he knew the Hokage had sent a message to Sund by bird that they had uncovered his treachery, and a party consisting in part of the Sun's own genin team would be returning to that village bearing proof, and a witness in the form of a sound traitor, Kin. So the Konoha party was going out to, they thought, deliver a package to a peaceful, allied village. Unbeknownst to that party, but knownst to us, Orochimaru had intercepted and destroyed that messenger bird, then used his position as Kazekage to order Sand to defend themselves against the invasion party from Konoha. There was some grumbling and disbelief. But when a military commander gives orders to a military organization in times of war, obedience was required, understanding was not. So really, the teams from Leaf had been walking into a trap. Because destroying Konoha could wait. Orochimaru really wasn't in any hurry. The body-swapping traitor had one resource no one else could top: time. His habit of serial possession of new bodies meant he had, quite literally, all the time in the world. He'd never grow old, or run out of lifespan. He could afford to be patient in his plans of revenge upon the village that spawned him. That didn't mean he enjoyed being patient. But this was not the first scheme he'd been willing to lay aside for later when a better opportunity presented itself in the short term. No, Konoha could wait. Orochimaru's first and main interest was in obtaining the Sharingan, as that was a key to accelerate all of his remaining plans. He could master more ninjutsu faster than ever before if he had those copy wheel eyes to call his own. So, Orochimaru, never a big believer in fair fights, brought enough force to obliterate that camp in seconds. Or so he'd thought. Ninja do not play fair, and particularly not when an enemy they are facing could potentially destroy them. Both Tsunade and Kakashi were legendary figures, if a bit lapsed in recent practice. Also, there were a hefty number of Jonin within the Konoha party. That was more than sufficient threat to merit the big guns, or the dirtiest tricks in the defenders' arsenals. You see, even the most legendary ninja can be beaten if you take them down before they have a chance to respond. But, being ninja, by the time they'd gotten to be a legend, one could expect most ambushes, cheap shots, or one-hit take-down tactics not to work. People who couldn't survive them didn't grow up to be ninja legends. So, only the trickiest, most overwhelming traps would do. And the trickiest, most overwhelming traps came in layers. Sandstorms, as it has been said, simply happen on deserts. So the guards on the Shinobi camp of Konoha ninja, who hadn't been trained to operate out in such things, did nothing but hunker down behind their walls for a miserable morning when a tall wave of blown sands rushed in upon their camp. Even the most paranoid Shinobi had to accept that weather simply happened, and most of the time there was nothing more to it than Mother Nature doing her thing. Of course, the very best of stealthy attacks did their best to appear exactly as what nature would be doing anyway. That's how stealth works, don't be remarkable. It was when somebody made mistakes in their mimicry of nature, and those errors got noticed, that the real Shinobi fights began. But, seeing as how the Sand Ninja were native to this environment, and Konoha Ninja weren't, their mistakes were fewer and less noticeable, while the visitors' perceptions of them were not as keen or refined as they might otherwise have been. The home court advantage and all that. Deadly in ninja wars. Now people dwelling in the land of wind don't have a lot of water to walk on, nor do they possess a ton of trees to climb over, or even leaves to float, so the ninja of sand had to learn to practice their chakra control using different things, stuff that was more readily available in their own environment. What that area had was an awful lot of wind-borne sand and dust. So, they developed their ninja training programs to take advantage of that. The most basic chakra control exercises for a student ninja in sand included one they called Stormwalker, which taught one how to divert wind carrying dangerous particles around you so it did not give abrasion burns to your gear or flesh. Another, Sand Sight, was to see and breathe normally despite clouds of dust. Hey, they taught vital control using what conditions the village had on hand, and were life-saving techniques for surviving in that environment. Such things were going to be encountered, you had to be able to deal with them. They also made it really easy to sneak up on an enemy camp under cover of a sandstorm. The blowing sands plus the sand sight power concealed them while permitting no concealment for their enemy. That's a dangerous advantage. For anyone who was curious, their third major chakra control exercise was called Sunblock, and employed the user's chakra to reduce the effects of intense sunlight on the body, so you didn't bake out on the desert. Not only was this a life-saving exercise to have, but they got almost constant practice by using it, and that led to many excellent ninja, granting them one of the lowest genin percentage ratios of any village. It was an environment that killed, and by becoming one with it, sand ninja became far more deadly to their enemies. Tumrai hadn't shown Clan Kitsune those techniques because they honestly had never occurred to her, just like it probably wouldn't have occurred to them to teach her water walking if they'd all been stuck in her village. The stuff necessary to train those techniques didn't occur there. Just like Konoha didn't teach one of the most common chakra exercises of hidden rain, for keeping oneself and gear dry in spite of near constant precipitation so jungle rot didn't set in and consume your equipment and limbs. That wasn't a problem in the considerably less moist land of fire. Ironically, one of rain's other chakra control exercises was for starting and maintaining a fire, something not easy to do in a land so frequently wet, and where dry firewood was nearly impossible to find. As the Konoha camp was hit by an apparently natural sandstorm caused by their attackers, several of them generating it using linked wind techniques to create a billowing, real-seeming sandstorm, visibility for anyone without the sand techniques dropped to near zero. The ninja doing this didn't even have to be very high-ranked. There were sand genin who could do this stunt, and not a few of them, it being common, basic, and a good attack technique out on a desert, but also excellent concealment to shelter a much larger attack, and a good role for your weakest fighters to still perform usefully in combat. In fact, provided they could do the technique properly, it was the best place for your least senior, least skilled ninja, as it put those soft and squishy targets far away from the dangerous heart of a battle while still allowing them to contribute to it in a useful fashion. Under this concealment, the most deadly, senior attackers moved in. The two Chunin on watch in the two guard towers never saw the two Jonin who approached them. Nor could they block the swords of wind that cut them both to pieces before they could even shout an alarm. Kakashi, who knew those sand techniques as part of his copied 1000, looked up at the guard houses, only for his one visible eye to widen. It widened even further at the sound of a dull shlick of a knife, and the infamous copy ninja slumped to the ground, having been stabbed to the heart from behind by Abisu. QQQQQ Orochimaru chuckled softly to himself, sloughing off Abisu's face, having killed the special Jonin to steal his identity for this trip. Then the amazing missing ninja reached out with his tongue, caught Kakashi's body before it hit the ground, brought it up to his mouth and swallowed it. That was one Sharingan, no matter what else happened. Still grinning in that madman way of his, the snake Sunin vanished off into the clouds of dust. Similar guard patrols got taken care of in similar ways. Now, since even Konoha ninja knew that sandstorms lasted variable periods of time and no one knew how long they would be, they'd been faced with a choice to either hole up in their huts, or in the main house. Since their huts were dull and boring, while the main house had all of the food, fun and people to hang around it, it naturally followed that the majority wound up there. Sand Ninja began to ghost around the perimeter, setting explosive tags upon it, while those within laughed and joked and ate together, trusting on their guards to keep them safe. Just to be sure, the Sand Ninja ghosting around in the storm also put tags on the domes of the huts, where they were exposed to their view. They also tried to place tags on the walls of the dome's bath, but none of those would stick. There was too short a supply of smooth surface to fix them to, and they didn't dare impale them on those spikes, as the primed tags would go off the moment they got torn. They would have sought and eventually found an answer. However, not even ambushes go perfectly according to plan. Neji Hyuga had been tasked by the clan elders with taking care that his cousin Hinata did not fall into the hands of an enemy of Konoha. They didn't care if she died, but as an unsealed main branch member her valuable bloodline was exposed to the danger of theft, and they could not have their principal advantage going to some other clan. So far Neji's duties had consisted primarily of turning on his own amazing eyes every so often to make sure he was keeping track of her. Up until this point it had been like watching a pornographic movie, the way she and the other members of the harem, as he'd dubbed them, sported with Uzumaki. It turned his stomach, playing voyeur like this. Some of that was inevitable, it came with the bloodline. You didn't choose to do it, but living in a town and seeing through walls, catching some glimpses was unavoidable, but Neji was sure that after this exposure to their antics he could write a book to outdo that infamous Icha Icha series. Although he felt some amount of gratitude to the village pariah for having taken Tenten off his hands. She was not fit to marry a Hyuga, any Hyuga, even a branch house member like him. And Neji admitted to some private amusement, in the back of his mind, over the mass desertion of the Uchiha's fangirls to the village clown and dead last. That they preferred the village pariah spoke volumes about the supposedly great Uchiha. For those two favors, taking away his own annoying fangirl and deflating the image of the unbeatable Uchiha, Neji even felt a slight amount of fondness to the whiskered blonde. It was very slight, and wouldn't get in the way of his duty, but it was present. However, as it became time for a routine check and the branch house member turned on his own eyes to check in on his cousin again, he noticed something different, namely the bodies of dead Konoha ninja on the ground and in the guard towers, and foreign shinobi running over the camp. Alarm! The always super serious boy shouted at the top of his lungs. We are under attack. This building is tagged. Foreign ninja have killed the camp guards. Hearing his shout of warning themselves, Sand Ninja detonated the incompletely distributed network of tags early, destroying only part of the manor-style house and getting a few of their own ninja caught in those blasts. One of Sand's prime explosives experts got caught in one of his own blasts, still having been in the act of placing more. However, he hadn't gotten to be so good without having learned how to shield himself from his own dangerous specialty, and although he got flung with significant force, he survived it. The Sand Ninja got slammed through a wall, skidding to a halt in a bathroom right beside Sajuke, who was standing, taking a leak. Instantly the thought went through the expert ninja's head, those are the most valuable balls in the elemental countries, they contain the secrets of the Sharingan. Said ninja then reached up, grabbed them, cut them off their owner with a swift stroke of a kunai, and escaped back through the hole he'd entered through, leaving Sajuke behind to writhe on the bathroom floor tiles in agony. Truly, the life of a bloodline wielder is fraught with peril. Unusual dangers of the most terrifying sort faced them every day. Very few other ninja were in any danger at all of having their danglies stolen by foreign agents. Writhing there on the floor, Sajuk would have preferred being stabbed through a vital organ, or had an artery cut. Never pausing to think of the irony of that, he noticed he was bleeding to death and moved his hands south to try and stem the flow. Pressing against the injury made it hurt dramatically more, though. The explosion wreaked havoc on the Konoha camp. Ninja got flung about by the blasts, killed or incapacitated before they had any chance at all to respond to the danger. As the manor house went up, most of the ninja who'd sheltered in it went down, already flinging the defenders into chaos. Guy and Lee had been the first to react to Neji's warning, knowing to take anything said by him seriously. They shot out of the building like cannonballs, before even the explosions rocked it, only to discover the windborne sun blocking all sight. Not to be deterred, the duo closed their eyes. Guy threw one end of a length of cloth to his prize student, Lee, and, holding the other himself, the pair of them ran about camp at top speed, stringing the line between them. The first time a sand ninja couldn't avoid their line, the pair sensed the touch and swarmed in, pummeling the ninja to death before resuming their pattern of leaping and cavorting through camp, making so unpredictable a pattern of movements as to be completely terrifying to the sand ninja trying to avoid them. And, though they could avoid most of the duo's rebounding about, it took a substantial amount of attention and began disrupting their attack. One of the attackers threw over a dozen kunai toward Guy, only to have them all blocked, tracked back to their source in an instant, and for the fitness duo to have pummeled that sand ninja out of existence also. Then Lee and Guy were back to rebounding about through camp. Several other Konoha Chunin, Chonin and Genin stumbled out of the blasted ruins, blind and disoriented, only to get finished off by sand ninja shielded from sight by the continually blowing storm. Kiba and Akamaru stumbled out of the ruined building, having been among the lucky ones far enough away from the main blasts to survive. But they found the clouds of airborne sand just as effective at clogging their nostrils and cutting off use of their extreme senses of smell as it was at blocking sight. The shriek of the wind wasn't doing his hearing any good, either. Shino had been among the unlucky ones, killed in the blasts as he'd been right next to a critical building support that had been heavily tagged. Of Shikamaru and Choji there was no sign. Then reinforcements burst in a frenzy from the undamaged bathhouse. I think we'll go with this as our official stance, keep Gara male. No sooner had the explosions sounded than Clan Kitsune, in its entirety, was already in motion, out of the water and heading toward the door. Activating their own version of the white eyes was practically universal between the first and second steps, and what they saw through the dome around their hot spring showed that the camp was already overrun by sand shinobi. They could dissect how and why that came to be later, but for right then, there were Konoha ninja down and dying. The attack had to be stopped. Questions could wait for later. Only their initial rush got stopped by the U-shaped entry arch having been blocked by a solid plug of stone some shinobi had materialized within, and the supposedly solid stone had several explosive tags embedded within it as a trap against those who might try to break out through the plug. What happened to our armor? Yugao asked, amazed that only her boots and armored gloves had materialized when she'd called for it. I didn't have time to finish it. Naruto shouted back, thinking ruefully of all of the traps and tricks he could have set up around camp, but hadn't, as this had been supposed to be an easy mission. Anbu interrupted before I got a chance to. Besides, we weren't supposed to need it. This was supposed to be a fun and peaceful training mission. Any idea who's doing this storm? Hana questioned. Obvious to her was that technique was doing the worst damage to the rest of the Konoha ninja. It could be anyone. Tamrai whispered. For most of our genin, this is the first attack technique they learn. With it, one ninja can shut down an entire invading army, and so every patrol is supposed to have it. Besides, the more ninja we have who know it, the wider our pool of experts when we really need someone to do it well. But this looks like several ninja working together made this storm. We do that occasionally for big operations. Well, we'll get those guys first. Anko cracked her knuckles. Tamrai shook her head. The ninja who are doing this could be more than a mile away. We train them to operate like that, actually. That way the chakra signal is almost completely undetectable, and there's nothing the targets can do by way of reprisal. Also, if a battle goes poorly, they can always cover the retreat of the assault teams. Isn't that difficult? How do you get people who have enough chakra to attack at that kind of range? Ino asked. You don't have to push too hard to start a wind when conditions are already this perfect. Tamrai objected. And a low-altitude wind will pick up the sand and grit all on its own. It's actually easier doing this than throwing a fireball. And the range just kind of takes care of itself. Wind travels until something stops it. At that moment their husband body flickered out of the dome, arriving at outside edge of their camp. Rose Rampart. Naruto shouted, barely heard above the sandstorm, shoving both chakra-infused hands against the dirt below his feet. An adaptation to an Earth-style rampart, a technique he'd learned from one of those few scrolls found left around the Uchiha estate. Much like his rose wall was an enhancement over the standard Earth-style wall, Naruto's rampart formed a humongous dome several hundred feet high, and trapping the entire embattled camp area within it. Cut off from their source of wind, the bulk of the clouds of dust and sand fell to the ground almost immediately, leaving only wispy traces still floating about waist-high. Then suddenly the newly enclosed area was filled by orange, as his clones appeared, rushing out to do battle. Grass of glass. The lead Chunin on the sand attackers recognized the tactic Naruto had used, and countered as best he could, gathering a huge amount of chakra to his hand before plunging it into the earth below them and sending large amounts of electricity through a desert floor across a wide area just beneath the surface, creating millions of tightly packed, needle-sharp blades of fairly sturdy glass at or near the surface. Naruto's clones began to pop like soap bubbles, as anyone walking or standing on that area got his feet punctured by the needle-sharp blades. That technique put a stop to Guy and Lee's amazing rampage, as well. But Naruto's angels were already rushing out of the bath dome, having used underground move techniques to completely bypass the enclosing wall. Their armored boots proved proof against the thin blades of glass, enabling them all to rush forward to engage in the fight. Naruto concentrated again, and trees sprang up from the ground, growing to an immense height in seconds and filling the whole area with foliage. It was merely an illusion, but one that cut off sight for most anyone without an advanced bloodline, turning back on the attacking ninja their advantage of denying an enemy concealment under conditions that concealed them, as none of the Kitsune clan lacked their own version of the Hyuga White Eyes. I think I've created a monster, Kuinai mumbled to herself, as rushing out to engage them, she found several of their attackers beginning to try negation techniques, only to find they were still trapped inside the illusion. Naruto had not only covered a wide area with what was, to most Chunin, a fairly heavy-hitting technique, but had gone so many layers deep it was almost pointless to try cancelling them all out. The kid certainly had a talent for illusions. What was worse, he had chakra to burn and the tricky sort of cleverness to use them well. Kuinai emerged from out of an illusionary tree to stab an attacker through the heart, before moving on to other prey, her accessories out and making her look a bit like a black-furred fox with red eyes. Kiba cleared his nostrils out with a snort and, red-eyed himself out of irritation from the dust that had gotten into them, went off to join the fight, guided by the Inuzuka family knows just fine. Kin selected for her opponent a Sand Kunoichi wearing a kimono and wielding a staff who'd just finished beating down a Konoha Chunin. Leaping out of the cover of an illusionary tree, however, her sword thrust still got blocked by the woman, who batted aside Kin's blade and gave her a smack to the head from the end of her staff almost at the same time. The woman dodged back to avoid a bolt of lightning from Hinata, granting Kin time to recover, but almost as soon as she was standing the woman lashed out with something and cut the Kitsune's sword off at the hilt. Seeing movement start again, Kin raised an earth-style wall, only to have her barricade cut through by her opponent's attack and sever both of the girl's arms. The former sound ninja fell to the ground, stumps of her arms bleeding as the remains of her wall crumbled before her. What was that? Kin cried out amidst disbelief and tears, slumping to one side. The iron cloth techniques, the kimono-clad Sand Kunoichi smugly replied. Then ribbons from the ends of the bow tied at the rear of the woman's costume snapped out, intercepting several weapons sent her way by a semi-distant Iam, blocking them all and returning some to their source. The first levels are to grant ordinary cloth the strength of steel, but we at Sand have combined that with our puppet control techniques to grant us extra weapons in combat. And also armor. She let one kunai through to rebound harmlessly off her kimono with a dull clang. The impact actually blunted the weapon. Kin stared at her opponent, trembling. But outside of the other woman's gaze, cut off from her field of vision by the remains of the angel's wall, Kin had reached out with her tail, grasped hold on one of her severed arms and brought it back against the stump, where her regeneration had taken hold and fused them back together. One of a handful of remaining Naruto clones came charging in, only to be sliced to pieces and instantly erupt in smoke under the blindingly fast strokes of the woman's cloth blades. The angel allowed herself to slump backward, along with a sigh of pain, to get her other shoulder outside of the woman's vision so she could do the same to it. Apparently battles had shifted to where her sisters could no longer offer Kin any fire support, because the kimono-clad woman began to walk toward her again. Did you really think you could take on a Jonin of Suna, little girl? Naked in public technique. Kin rose up, forming the hand seals. The Sand Kunoichi's eyes grew round as her clothing exploded off of her in a shower of tiny shards, depriving her of both her most useful weapons and her defense. Kin's tail blew a hole through her chest with 1,000 birds only moments later. The woman's staff fell apart in 2 pieces from where she'd tried to block with it. Gasping, the wounded angel rose up to go off and provide fire support for one of her embattled sisters. Shitsune rapidly entered the half-ruined manor, using softly spoken codes to pass by the terrified guards who'd hastily assembled at the open gaps and rents in those walls, trying to provide some shelter for the wounded inside. Keeping her ears tuned for news of the battle outside, and her whiskers trim and ready to transmit the slightest sign of warning, she swiftly set about her work healing those who had not yet died among the Konoha contingent. Tamrai came in and joined her moments later, ill at ease fighting other ninja of her hometown. Her first patient was Kankuro, her brother, who'd been standing near the buffet table at the time the explosives had gone off, and the ambushers had deliberately seeded that area rather heavily. Out in the thick of it, Yugao found herself disarmed by a heat of the desert sun technique, forcing the metal of her weapons and bits of armor to become blazing hot, to where she could no longer hold them. Not bearing to think of how that could have hurt her if she'd been wearing full armor, the Anbu settled down into a gentle fist stance and waited for her opponent to make a move. He came charging in moments later. Off in her own corner of the battle, Tsunade found herself facing off against a ninja who had twin tails coming out the back of his head. They looked like cloth, and then she realized it was a close-fitting cap. Tsunade of the Chunin. I am honored. The Chunin flicked hair back out of her face. Tsunade had gone back to the hairstyle that she'd worn as a genin, bouncy in a way that framed her face better, and with a high-arching ponytail in back. With her new bloodline and its recently added eyes, she didn't have to pull it back from her face to keep her vision clear anymore. It also made her look substantially younger. You're dead, for attacking my husband and his friends like this. She, like all of Clan Kitsune, had released her foxy accessories, as the advantages they offered were simply necessary for this level of fight. Although, like most others, her were hidden under an illusionary disguise technique to avoid disturbing their Konoha friends. I am a shinobi. I can accept death as part of my mission, the cap-wearing ninja told her in surprisingly jocular tones, before leaping to the attack. Hell viewing. Great, Tsunade thought wryly, on watching her arms and hands age to old and infirm, feeble limbs before her. Why does it have to be an illusion specialist? I can beat him, she thought, thrusting out with a mighty punch before spinning around into a kick. But Naruto's going to be cuddling me for a week before I can shake all the doubts about my appearance. Illusion guys always hit you where you're most sensitive. Activating her white eyes to dispel the technique also enabled her to navigate through the illusionary trees which otherwise blocked line of sight after a few feet. Her first combo got adroitly dodged, but the follow-up landed a solid punch on the cap-wearing ninja's forehead, which exploded under her punch. Into sand. What? She cried aloud. She heard the ninja's laughter while streams of sand pooled together, forming clones. Lots of sand clones. Nowhere near Naruto's level, but more than any average Chunin ought to be able to produce. And what was it with using sand? Ah, my dear Chunin, it was the first container of Shukaku that gave us the idea. The ninja laughed. Clones can be made out of virtually any element, water, mud, leaves, even one's own shadow. Since it is cast in one's own image, it is yourself that grants you any affinity necessary to establish a clone. Having the element itself mastered is merely a bonus, albeit a very useful one. Not wanting to talk much, and upset at being mocked, Tsunade swung hard at a clone, wishing those trees were real so she could break one off at the base and use it as a paddle for swatting dozens of clones at once. There, her borrowed Hyuga bloodline sight gave her a shot, revealing where the real sand ninja had been hiding under about 20 feet of soil, relying on his sand clones to take a few hits, dodge others, and eventually to wear her down. Not today, she darted down with her own underground move technique and planted a solid hit on the guy's face, breaking his cheekbone and twisting his neck. Amazingly enough, the guy survived it, and immediately body flickered out. Not so easy, my little friend. She raced up behind the running ninja and planted a fist between his shoulder blades, only to dissolve another sand clone. This guy's really beginning to annoy me, she muttered to herself. You still haven't got it, have you? The guy returned to her. All clones have their own unique properties, based on their element of origin. Water is a hard element to govern according to strict rules, so it fights at only a tenth the power of the true wielder, not perfect in following his instructions. Making clones out of one's own shadow, you are constructing them out of a part of yourself, and thus they follow instructions perfectly, but are as soft as a whisper of darkness under blows. Sand, while not an ideal substance in many ways, has the advantage of being capable of reforming every time you hit it. And, indeed, those clones she'd disrupted were reforming around her. "Fireball!" she called, thrusting out both fists. This was another of those techniques Naruto had modified, and instead of having to blow flames out of your mouth, they could be projected from other parts of your body. Hands were easier than most. A couple of clones got hit and slagged down, melting into glass. 2 more followed a second after, and Tsunade smirked. "Wanna bet that I've got more chakra than you, pup?" This technique uses hardly any, while, as you say, all clones have differences, but they also share common properties, and being expensive chakra sinks is one of them. The man sweated. At the center of acres of little glass spines, Naruto shifted his stance, grimacing at the bloody wounds cut into his feet, through the sandals, by those green blades. His regeneration just kept ejecting the glass fragments and sealing over those wounds, or else he'd have been permanently crippled by then. Still, it slowed down his maneuverability a great deal to have to cope with that much pain every time he took a step. Glaring across at the sand Chunin, Naruto risked a quick glance to the man's feet. But, unlike Naruto, who, like most people, sank several inches into the loose, soft sand every time he shifted his weight, the Chunin was standing atop those grains in much the same way that Naruto stood on water. And, because most of those needles were partially buried, the Chunin could walk right over most of them without fear of them penetrating his shoes. Seeing his attention shift, the Chunin snorted arrogantly. "Our sun stride technique, the most basic chakra control exercise we have. Students are taught how to do it in our ninja academy, and get ceaseless practice while on patrols. It has the beneficial side effect of leaving no tracks behind on an otherwise very impressionable surface, but mostly our patrols can range farther and wider without exhaustion if we walk on top of the sand instead of wading through it, like you foreigners have to." The man smirked nastily. "And we take advantage of that mobility, boy." Compressed air ball. The Chunin shot a bullet of high-pressure air towards Naruto who, having faced the same thing on a much larger scale fighting Shukaku, knew to expect a massive explosion once it hit. He knew the crushing power probably wouldn't kill him, but being blasted across hundreds of feet of those glass blades as he skidded uncontrolled across the sand probably would tear him to pieces. Leaping was the obvious answer, avoiding the direct attack. But once he did that he'd have to land, and those glass shards would mess him up, almost certainly causing him a second's delay just to deal with the pain of landing on those spikes, a delay which the Chunin was already maneuvering to take advantage of. Naruto leapt anyway, arching high above the incoming missile, which caused a substantial amount of damage to unoccupied terrain as it detonated behind him. Noting his trajectory, the Chunin fired another of the same, timing it for just as the boy hit ground. Instead, the blonde swung away, having used his leap to assist his wires in catching onto the rose rampart arching high above their heads. So he didn't land where the Chunin expected, and the technique he'd fired off was useless. Of course, the Chunin wasn't about to stop there. Pressure sickle. Interesting, Naruto thought, observing the technique race toward his wires. It looked mostly similar to his own pressure bullet attack, but that one used concussive force to do its damage, and he could swear this one looked more like a blade, and he could guess what that could do to his wires. Sure enough, it cut them and Naruto went tumbling toward the ground. Once more the Chunin aimed a compressed air ball for him, timing it for just as the boy hit the ground. But the boy angled himself to fall just a little faster than the Sand Chunin had expected, and managed to not only land and spear his feet, but to leap off again in spite of the amazing pain. It still hurt him, though, and one could see him grimace in agony as he flew through the air on his parabolic arc. Once more he managed to slip through the air a little faster than expected and hit ground a second before the Jonin's next compressed air missile. This time the pain lancing through his feet was so hard to take the young lad fell to one side, lancing more glass needles through his right leg and side, with one arm shoved into the sand to steady himself and not fall further into the mass of improbably sharp blades. Yet still the boy managed to muster intense concentration enough to overcome the pain, even momentarily, and leap off again in the split second before the next missile hit. Although that time he landed very badly, falling on his back as his legs simply refused to support him. Needles lancing into his spine caused the blonde's back to arch and he cried out in agony, but still he jerkingly brought his hands together and body flickered out of the way of the Jonin's next missile. That was it, however. There wasn't any more reserves to call on, and when the Jonin arrived he collapsed limply to the sand, barely even mustering enough to cry out when this sent glass needles into his face as he fell forward on the grit, giving away to those sharp blades it hid. The lead Jonin of the sand contingent finished him off with considerable satisfaction, detonating the boy under another compressed air ball, right before the Jonin himself got hit from above by a breakthrough technique releasing wind in a long cone, tearing apart all within. It wasn't as strong as Orochimaru's great breakthrough technique, but it would do, and was what Naruto had. Dropping from the second set of wires from which he'd hung suspended above the battlefield, he was surprised to hear a shocked cry of Naruto from behind and to his left. "Are you all right?" Ayame demanded, running up to check her husband all over for those wounds he'd picked up, but that had mysteriously disappeared even faster than their regeneration could account for. "Yeah." Then, seeing her confusion, he elaborated, "My body flickered out even before his pressure sickle cut through my wires, leaving an ordinary illusion clone behind me, which I sent through a series of actions to draw that guy's attention. It's amazing how willing guys are to focus on an opponent they feel they are beating. I tricked him into blowing up practically all his field of glass blades by having my illusion hop from one part of it to another while he shot at it with those big explosive techniques. Meanwhile, I got to be building up to a big attack while that guy was wasting chakra shooting at my image." Naruto rubbed at the back of his head sheepishly. "Yeah, someday I'm going to have to apologize to Abisu. I told that guy I could imagine no use at all for an ordinary clone when I could already do shadow clones. But he was right. There's an amazing amount you can do with one. Even if it can't do any damage, they don't dispel when hit either, and make amazing distractions." That was the moment a large dragon chose to form out of the sand where the Jonin had supposedly gone down. Turning to face this with a serious expression, Naruto formed lightning whips in both hands and told his bride, "Ayame, get out of here. You aren't up to fighting Jonin yet." Suddenly there were a few hundred Narutos again, standing on areas cleared out by the previous explosions. "Grass of glass." The Jonin cried out again, resuming his most useful area denial technique. "Earth-style wall." Naruto called out of 100 throats, forming pillars and columns linked at the top by stone bridges, looking like some outdoor classical temple. And on top of every column was a Naruto, all of whom began flinging knives and shuriken at the Jonin, all of which just happened to have wires attached, forming nets of cutting wire even as the guided weapons homed in. The Jonin formed a gesture and a cage of crystal spears rose out of the ground to protect him, then exploded outward in a hail of razor shards. "Underground move." All of the Narutos called out, slipping beneath the sand to avoid the assault of razor-sharp crystal. Ayame was already running, and fairly far away, racing over to where Ino was faced off against 3 opponents, and not doing terribly badly considering how badly she was outnumbered. The fight could switch with a little help thrown in on Ino's side, of course. Ino had taken to Yugao's sword lessons better than practically anybody else, and was currently holding 3 armed attackers at bay. Iam chose to alter those odds more in her clan's favor. While the ramen chef's daughter was no prize at sword combat herself yet, that was okay, as she'd begun her focus in the ninja arts on more of a fire support role, and still remained much better in that area than in others. Iam formed herself a dozen shadow clones and began to rain shuriken and kunai down in a hail of thrown weapons on Ino's opponents. Ino noted the assistance and was glad for it. She'd been pressed hard for nearly a minute, and as anyone who's been in one can tell you, a minute of close combat fighting with your life on the line was an eternity. She wouldn't have survived as long as she had without the clan advantages. Her white eyes allowed her to pass through illusions her foes would still dodge around. That had been a useful escape from a desperate situation once or twice. But also they allowed her to keep track of all of her opponents at once, which had been vital for keeping them all at bay. Ino was fighting souped up on beast mimicry with a sword in each hand and a lightning whip on the end of her tail, and 3 weapons against 3 opponents had been just about right for keeping them from overwhelming her. They'd scored hits and she'd scored hits, but between her eyes and whiskers they'd never landed any solid blows on her. She'd always been able to dodge the worst of it, and her regeneration had taken care of the rest. Of course, her foes had been absorbing her blows pretty well. So it had been a more or less even stalemate, with no more at risk as the slightest slip-up on her part would have enabled them to finish her. Now, with the artillery from Iam arriving, Ino turned the tables and struck, taking the head off of one attacker with her lightning whip in the instant he'd been hit in the back by 3 kunai. Then it was a swift duck and roll under the slashes of the other 2 until senbon needles flew into their eyes and Ino was able to turn her twist into a slash, taking off the arms of one guy and gutting the other. Then, to her shock and amazement, all 3 of her foes stood up again, including the guy who was lacking a head. What is it with these sand guys and their puppets? Ino shrieked out, vein pulsing on her forehead, just as the trio of wooden objects she'd assumed were people resumed their attacks. Her cry reached up to Beiki, who stood, arms folded, conspicuously doing nothing to help either side, on the roof of the half-ruined manor house, and the man had to resist the urge to grin. Some of those Konoha shinobi were good, their kunoichi particularly. He'd been honestly surprised to find so many competent ones among their ranks, among the rising generation especially. Still, it was expected for them to miss a trick or 2 from time to time, and it sounded like one of them had just run afer of how very easy it was for some of San's puppet masters to trade places with their creations. Often enough, they did it as the stroke of a sword fell. It never hurt to have so useful a specialty in your village. Still, Beiki straightened his face out into a stoic mask. Although he felt for both sides, it was vital that he be seen not aiding either. That way, he would not be forced to fight against his comrades, and if the Sand won he could still deliver the message about their replaced Kazekage, a mission more important than any life here, including his own. Of course, that did not prevent those who saw him from despising his lack of help to their own side. Hannah glanced up at the man and sniffed, as if smelling something awful. Then she went back to slaughtering the trio of Sand genin who'd made the mistake of fighting against her. It was almost pitiful, tearing through their ranks in a piercing fang. Having torn apart their bodies, she stopped spinning and checked for new foes. Standing where she was, her eyes caught sight of a figure out of her range before, and she body flickered over in a panic to join him. Kiba lay at the base of a building, passed out and dying of a combination of wounds and chakra exhaustion, amidst the bodies of 3 Sand shinobi and Akamaru. the poor dog had been cut in half. Weeping, Hannah held her brother's body to her as he died, unconscious of her desire to hold him and keep him with her, causing a strange sucking sensation to occur in the back of her mind. Meanwhile, Tenten, Anko and Hinata had joined forces against a particularly deadly team from Sand. Orochimaru knew quite well the composition and strength of the Konoha force. Learning that was one excellent reason for having infiltrated it, after all. And, as their Kazekage, he'd had access to the entire village of Sand out of which to select his ambush party for destroying them. No point using regular ninja when he'd been able to call up the elites. He'd chosen a force he'd felt adequate to wipe out the Konoha party in seconds, including his former teammate, who'd had not one but several ninja selected just on the basis of countering and eventually killing her. Tsunade of the Sunin fought like a bull, but for defeating that you just needed a couple of matadors. Sand specialized in such tactics. Just look at their preponderance of puppet users. Orochimaru felt that his former teammate and ally would have fallen soon enough under the combination of "here is the cape, charge at it," as Kabuto would have used to draw her out of town, if the timeline had gone unaltered, distractions using clones and puppets, and ruthless stabs to the heart that could have been accomplished by, say, having Tsunade's arms chopped off by the Iron Cloth Jonin, and others like her who specialized in an assortment of speedy forms of death. He'd actually had several teams like that selected and tasked only with taking her out. And it would have worked, too, if not for those meddling kids. Orochimaru, when he was under disguise as Ebisu, had overheard Kuinai state that Naruto was an up-and-coming legendary shinobi, but that was a boast made so often in certain circles it was meaningless. Any brat could claim to be a future legend or Hokage. In fact, many did claim just that until the sheer load of work involved to get there became apparent. Then those boastful youngsters turned, more often than not, into laid-back adults who were more than happy to stay mediocre for the rest of their lives, as that was just far less effort than pursuing their childhood dreams of greatness. Most who began that path didn't have the winning combination of talent and determination to see it through. Many who did never had the opportunity to try, and most people got stopped before they had the skill, while most aspiring ninja with the qualities died before they had the experience. Of course, every so often one did slip through who had the traits needed to become a legend. Frequently they got stopped by some obstacle during their rise. Death or serious injury was a reality to ninja, and the death tolls among those just starting out the trade were ferocious, despite natural aptitude. Older shinobi made a point of preying on younger, weaker foes when possible, as the easiest way to pursue their own goals and maintain survivability was to strike at those who typically represented the weakest links, the young. But you did get the occasional brat who made it through even that stage, and once they reached a certain point it was only a very short trip to become what most only dreamed of, a legend. What Orochimaru couldn't account for was how Konoha had suddenly gotten so many of them. The orange brat was clearly leading the pack, but he was far from the only one among those genin he'd previously dismissed as inconsequential to be actively disrupting his plans. For that matter, it wasn't only the genin that were a problem. Orochimaru had underestimated a number of Konoha's female jonin and chunin. Even his old comrade Tsunade was standing up disturbingly well against what was now a pair of ninja he'd selected specifically to prey against her weaknesses. By impersonating the Kazekage, he'd had access to Sand's elite shinobi for this little operation, and he'd selected what he felt would be generous for destroying both his former teammate, as well as the rest of these Konoha ninjas. An illusion /sand clone master, plus a stealth / long range attack specialist ought to have been a combination able to confuse, disorient, and defeat her fairly quickly. Yet she might even defeat them. Nor was that the only fight gone contrary to his expectations. There were many of them, too many, in fact. Far too many, and it was disgusting him. The young things weren't legends yet, but they'd passed all those points that halted the vast majority of aspirants, having displayed a disturbing amount of skill, and yes, experience, particularly considering their overall young age. That made the likelihood of them having the needed talent and determination much higher. He could indeed be looking on young legends in the making. Orochimaru couldn't think of any thought that could have displeased him more. He was out to destroy Konoha. Not watch them rise to greatness on a fresh tide of new legendary shinobi suddenly appearing out of nowhere. And as far as numbers went, they had more possible legends here than all the previous generations of shinobi legends from Konoha combined. They only had a half dozen or so legends before, and here were 12 nearly realized potentials. If even half. Half. If one of those should fully realize that potential. No, that was completely unacceptable. The Snake Sunin had kept Kabuto in place watching over the village Chunin exams to keep him informed of any such prodigies as they might appear. To have so many reveal themselves so suddenly, just in time to thwart him on this attack, smacked of either incompetence or disloyalty on his spy's part. Neither would be tolerated. That's it. Anko shouted, dodging a blow aimed toward her face even as she ranted, striking back on her opponent. This in-depth planning thing has gone on far enough. It's causing our situational awareness to rot. We need to be more ready for surprises than this. From now on, every other reset has got to include something where we practice causing events we're unprepared for. Tenten wished she could disagree. But she couldn't. They'd formed a trio with Hinata and driven like a spearhead toward their clan's tigers, who'd been blocked inside of their stables in the same way that the attackers had tried blocking the girls inside the bath, filling up the entryway with a solid plug of stone. That should not have been a problem for the shinobi seeking to rescue their mounts and companions. And, indeed, it wasn't. No, the problem came from the particularly deadly sand team that had encountered them on the way. Hinata was currently nursing her hand, the flesh of which was partially dissolved, as if she'd dunked it in acid. The guy she'd struck wasn't terribly happy, either. In fact, he was down for the count, but even her regeneration was struggling to restore the damage she'd caused herself by hitting him, and she was forced to assist that with medical techniques she knew. And that was a problem, because two more of that guy's buddies stood there opposed to them, and all three, both the two standing and the one on the ground, gave off auras of a sickening green mist that sizzled and dripped, and striking through that had partially dissolved Hinata's hand. Countless bloodlines, major and minor, abounded in the elemental countries. Some were trivial, with no observable benefits, just some outward mark like having pink hair. Others were so great they had helped determine the fates of the elemental countries, and wars had been risked, or fought, over their possession. Konoha had certainly taken the cream of the crop of the big-name bloodlines, but that did not mean there weren't more humble ones out there. And while there were other, flashier bloodlines, more famous ones surely, the village of Sand did have its share of the lesser ones. Contrary to some expectations, not everyone who had a functioning bloodline ability became a ninja, either. There was a rather large family, too loosely associated to be called a clan, of farmers in Fire Country whose ability was just to compost weeds faster. They still had to cut or kill them normally, but once dead they could rot them into perfect fertilizer in an instant. It was not something that lent itself well to ninja combat. Oh, there were those who'd adapted worse things into advantages. The originators of the precious Hyuga bloodline ability way back when had been doctors before the gentle fist style had been developed, something that the chakra scalpel technique those medics had learned is said to have had a part in. But, once it came right down to it, that was a risky leap to take, to go from being prosperous civilians among the best at their trade to being lackluster ninja who might well be killed before developing anything useful. That was a switch not many who'd tried it survived. Most bloodlines required a great amount of work to fully adapt to ninja duties. The members of the Kishimoto clan facing off against the trio of Konoha Kunoichi being a good example, they destroyed everything they touched, and while you'd think that would be a terribly advantageous thing for a ninja to do, it had some significant drawbacks. The clan had moved to Sund because, out in those deserts, there was little for them to destroy, and so no outraged neighbors to get upset that they'd cut a swath through a cornfield or whatever, leaving behind a trench of dead plants and poisoned earth just by passing by. In an oddball kind of synthesis, they also fed on what they destroyed, so they did not starve. However, they could not, for example, use pieces of standard ninja equipment. So, while any foe striking them with a hand, kick, or sword in combat would generally lose that limb or weapon, dissolving on contact with the Kishimoto, that would do little to preserve the recipient's life, as the Kishimoto could not wear protective armor or wield weapons of their own to block blows with. Their martial arts also were generally not the best, as they lacked sparring partners. And forget getting them any doctors should a Kishimoto be injured in practice. It was just not going to happen. The village had long ago begun research into ceramics for weapons and armor that would not dissolve at the touch of their acid, but that research had ceased when San's funding had taken a sharp dive. The Kishimoto would have loved to have continued the work themselves, but as they could not marry anyone but their own siblings, as anyone else would literally dissolve in their embrace, their intelligence had taken a sharp dive over the generations. So they were unable. Thus, a clan whose bloodline may very well have competed with the Uchiha for prominence had remained fairly obscure and unremarkable through the years. They couldn't even be sent on most missions, as leaving a trail of destruction wherever they went made stealth completely impossible. So they had to be left out of ambush scenarios and the like. And they were hard to treat like regular ninja, as it was nearly impossible to test them, or figure out how they could be paid. Training them had its own set of difficulties. However, for fighting people like Tsunade they were close to ideal, and that was why Orochimaru had called them up. Staring at the three Kishimoto, clad only in loincloths woven out of their own hair, Anko realized that, if it weren't for the support group hiding behind them, Tenten alone could have blown through these destructo zombies with a couple of thrown kunai they could have easily afforded to lose. But when the enemy had a wind mistress on their side, you couldn't rely too much on thrown weapons. Put an earth master in there, shielding them with walls and other techniques as needed, and there wasn't a great deal you could do they couldn't counter. As an unusual twist, the earth guy was also a puppet master. Anko finished smashing down the latest combat puppet sent against her by slapping it with a dozen explosive tags and kicking it back into the midst of the acid-dripping guys. But a quick wall of earth contained the explosion, so it did not take out any of the sand ninja, as she'd hoped it might. The special Jonin put her hands on her hips, surveying the Kishimoto caught in Tenten's sticky capture field. If we could blow past these guys in front, their support team almost wouldn't matter. Ha! Don't count on it, girl, called the opposing wind mistress from behind the earth guy's wall. Our Kishimoto would eat you alive. You mean they eat what they dissolve? Like human flesh? That's gross. Tenten's attention was almost totally focused on constantly renewing her sticky capture field, as her foes were just as quickly dissolving it. But that little nugget of disgusting information caused her attention to waver, and her corrosive foes lurched forward a step before she could recapture them. That had left Anko to be dealing with puppets and countering wind techniques while Hinata was busy healing her hand. Tossing her hair, the special Chunin posed, countering yet another wind attack. Actually, I think the creepiest thing about these acid guys is I've heard that, having no skill themselves, they are all Uchiha fangirls and Sharingan worshippers. Now that's just sad. Tenten shook her head in pity. Hinata had recovered her hand enough to where the regular regeneration had taken over. So, shaking it out, she threw a single senbon needle toward her foes. It flew by, missing by a country mile to stick in the Suna's earth wall. Ha! Not even worth blocking, girl. You ought to work on your aim a little. The opposing wind mistress called out. Ding! Ding! A careful tug on a thin wire made the bells attached to that senbon ring. What was that? The wind mistress panicked, feeling something she couldn't easily identify. The Konoha team smiled. Yugao panted. Scowling at her newest opponent, she muttered, I swear, this den mother stuff isn't worth it. I can't even count on a good snuggling after stuff like this to keep me sane. Maybe I should. Don't. Kin interrupted from behind her, throwing another barrage of kunai. You haven't made it 100 resets yet. I bet on you making it. I believed in you. Don't let me down. The two sand ninjas stared at them in disbelief. They'd choose a moment like this to talk about something like that. Ignoring their ire, the swordswoman chuckled. So, what do you forfeit? Kin blushed red. I'd rather not say. Is that okay? Yeah, that's fine, Yugao agreed, before sliding into a 64 palms strike on her opponent, knocking him out and flying, all of his chakra points closed. She continued talking casually as she moved on to the next one. But it won't stop me from giving up early, if I want to. Nuu. Kin wailed. As the lead Chunin of the sand team, the guy had a ton of chakra. Naturally, however, Naruto had more. Although, if he hadn't been surprised, this fight would have gone better. How do you keep that up? The blonde boy asked, as the two combatants were panting, staring at each other across the tortured battlefield. While he still had chakra, the boy was physically exhausted, and wounded in enough places that his regeneration was struggling to keep up. Even his unreal stamina had limits, and he'd reached those a while ago. The sand guy's earth dragon had wreaked fearsome slaughter among Naruto's clones, even hitting Naruto himself a couple of times. The one time he'd seen Kakashi use a technique like that, a water dragon, it had just lunged at the target and blown apart, like hitting him with a hose or a wave, not terribly effective. But this earth dragon had behaved more like a wild animal, rending and tearing, crushing and killing, destroying all in its path, all the while staying completely under the control of the guy who'd created it. Almost like a summon, actually. Or a puppet, which would explain things. Dang thing hadn't had any internal organs, either, so blowing holes in it with 1,000 birds was of limited utility. It had been an immense amount of work to put that dragon down, a job not made the least bit better by the Chunin who'd created it still flinging about jutsu the entire time. Naruto honestly hadn't believed any ordinary person had that much chakra. Ha! Not all bloodlines are the Sharingan, boy. The Chunin replied scornfully. It may not be much in the minds of an Uchiha or a Hyuga, but my clan can store up our chakra for a whole week before a fight. That's 7 times the chakra capacity of any ninja of equal training, even if our recovery of it isn't any faster than normal. Now my question to you, how is it you've managed to keep up with me? You aren't a lost nephew or cousin of mine, are you? Heh, not likely, Naruto panted, hands on his knees as he fought to get his breath back, watching some of his wounds visibly knit. But what if I were? What's your name, boy? Uzumaki. The Jonin considered, before rising up and settling back into a stance. You look nothing like her, but I may have known your mother, kid. Sorry, no relation, just refugees from the same defunct village. That's all right. Naruto drew himself up straight, assuming a martial arts stance, and secretly glad this had been solely a battle of elemental jutsu so far, his best skill, and given his body's development limitations, the one area where he could compete with a Jonin on anything close to equal terms. Then, of course, he had regeneration and unreal stamina to deal with all the times and places he'd fallen short in their fight, like getting hit by an enormous dragon. I don't suppose you'd tell me your name, now? Sorry, kid. I don't like making friends with people I'm about to kill. Poor business procedure. I understand. Earth Dragon. A voice cried out far to his left, and Naruto glanced over to see the Jonin coming to the end of a long string of hand seals and shouting to get a little extra push for shoving a big technique through on low chakra. I snapped back to the figure opposite him, to see it grinning, just before it disappeared. Both versions of the Jonin had been deliberately standing just outside range of his white eyes, having learned that radius during the battle, and Naruto fought the urge to slap his forehead. He'd been talking to a clone. Of all the stupid techniques to fall for. The ground rumbled as the new dragon started to materialize, only to stop and crumble back to the earth as Ino emerged from the rough bark of an illusionary tree behind the Jonin and lopped his head off. Then his arms, then his legs, and chopped the chest in half just to make sure. Apparently she'd been fighting a few puppets lately. Naruto sagged to the ground, exhausted, wounds still partially healed. She ran up as he collapsed to his hands and knees. Smiling weakly for her, he panted, "Thanks. No problem, honey. You had it worse than the rest of us." She wiped his forehead with a damp cloth, then smiled for him. "Thank you for occupying that guy for so long." The boy nodded. If there was one thing he could still do better than anyone else, it was to take damage from a big, scary monster of an enemy shinobi while everyone else positioned for finishing that guy off. It wasn't a fun job, but he could do it. And, of course, the whole job got even less fun than that when his support group got distracted, being drawn into fights of their own. "Sorry we didn't come sooner," Ino apologized, looking contrite. Naruto smiled, brushing a trail of blood from her cheek with the back of his hand. "Yeah, well, you were busy. That's not an excuse you'd ever give us." "I'm sorry." She bent down and kissed him. On recovering his breathing room, he sat up, struggling to stand. "No, it's all right. Guy kept it mostly to a jutsu fight. Only kind of fighting I've got where I can match pace with a Jonin. Guy would have thrashed me. Not fair, comparing yourself to him." Ino pouted, teasing. "Can you name even one person who can match him in a fist fight?" No. Lee comes closest, but the student has not yet surpassed the master on that one. Ino agreed, assisting Naruto to his feet, sliding his arm around her shoulders before they both started stumbling off towards shelter, already spent. "Your feet are a mess," she observed, after they'd gone a short ways. Naruto chuckled tiredly. "Yeah. Guy kept blowing up everything I created to stand on, and stopped getting fooled by wires. Couldn't you do anything to protect your feet? The tired boy shook his head. I tried water walking, but sand must work different. Heh, I even tried those chakra pads we use for crossing our sticky capture fields, no luck. They still let my feet sink into the loose sand and onto those needles of his. I'm not surprised. Those pads are paper thin, only supposed to keep you from making contact and getting stuck on the glue. She sighed, then shot him a bright, if somewhat tired smile. Still, I can't believe you won't have developed something to work on by the next time we reset. There came a roar, and both looked up just in time to see the dome Naruto had created to shelter the battlefield get smashed open by Manda, the giant serpent summons of Orochimaru. That may come sooner than we thought, Naruto whispered. The storm came whistling in even as the chunks of his former rampart fell. Sakura was still in the bath, huddled in fear, able to see everything out of the semi-transparent wall now that the sandstorm had ceased, and shocked down to her toenails by the performance of Naruto and the other girls. Her top still hung open from when she'd flashed Naruto, unnoticed by her as all her attention was focused on the fighting going on outside. Naruto! Summon Gamabunta! Tsunade shouted, having only just crushed both of her attackers under her giant slug summons. I can't! The boy shouted back. Wait! Came several astonished female shouts, as hair twinged out. It takes all day to get that crazy toad to accept me as a summoner. Then he has to be convinced to fight for me. I only ever bother anymore when I know we have a big fight coming up. Naruto shouted back. Manda lunged. Orochimaru laughed. The problem with slugs and toads in a desert environment was that both creatures had smooth, moist skin that dried out easily, especially in dry, hot winds. And both those creatures also died if they dried out too completely, something deserts were very good at doing, and to which their skins made them both especially vulnerable. There was an exception in the form of horned toads, which could manage just fine in desert environments, but those did not make up the majority of Jiraiya's summons, or even his most frequent or useful ones. Slugs had no chance. While ordinarily, Orochimaru would not have engaged Tsunade in a summons battle, here the territory favored him against her. Virtually all of combat was like a giant game of scissors, rock, paper, A trumps B, B trumps C, but C trumps A. That was a vastly simplified version of it, but the process was the same. One key to the legendary Chunin was their team had an excellent example of each major field of ninja combat ability, all wrapped together in one tight team. Each one had been strong where the others had weaknesses, and by covering for each other, they could defeat virtually all who opposed them. Of course, that team had since been broken up. And Orochimaru, knowing of Tsunade's weaknesses, had plotted specifically to prey upon those in the teams he'd arranged to defeat her. If she'd been, say B, then he'd loaded up the ambush group with all of the C he'd felt they would need and then some. If she'd been as he'd remembered her, they ought to have defeated her easily. Only, it hadn't worked out that way. So he'd opened a summons battle, hoping to overcome her in another way. As the wounded kept pouring in, Tumrai was simply kicking herself for not having included the various sand village techniques in their training regimen before this. Sure, there were loads of ninja fighting out there, but if her husband and sisters had known how to fight on this territory they could have done more, much faster. And that would have resolved the whole thing. It was their specialized environmental techniques and training that made ninja from Suna so dangerous on their home terrain. It also explained why hidden sand was a major power, despite inability to destroy Konoha in Orochimaru's ambush invasion. The attack jutsu that worked so well in Suna territory were just about impossible to practice in Leaf territory. But, on the other hand, trying to tackle Suna in their own environment was suicide, even without Gaara using the entire landscape as a weapon against you, unless you were the ridiculously powerful kind of ninja that make up the members of Akatsuki, or had knowledge of the land's defenses. That attack on Konoha had still slaughtered so many ninja that the Great Leaf would have suffered a crippling shortage of upper-level ninja for a long while afterwards. But sand really wasn't their strongest on attack. No, their territorial advantage made them strongest on defense, and they were out there using that for all it was worth. So sand pressed hard, feeling they still had the advantage, but Konoha was fighting back ferociously, knowing this had been a peace mission and angry over this betrayal, so eager to get their teeth into their enemy. As it stood now, both sides were bleeding down. The Konoha side had gotten kicked in the nuts from the outset, so was fighting at far below their usual ability, disadvantaged due to surprise and the sheer number of wounded. While her friends and allies from Sand were finding the Kitsune clan a hard nugget to chew, and their ambush was choking on it. The ninja from Konoha were grim and bloody, after revenge for this betrayal, and the Sand felt they were defending their home. But if either side had a clear advantage, the loser would have withdrawn. As it was, each side felt they could pull off a victory, and were still out there grinding each other to pieces. It shouldn't have had to be like this. Suna only wanted war with Konoha in the first place because the daimyo from Wind Country was an idiot and messed with the balance of power between the two ninja villages. Tamrai, and all the clones she could create, were simply up to her armpits in wounded friends from both sides, and wanted to cry her eyes out, but couldn't spare the time. Naruto's clones were popping. He couldn't hold any of them up in the face of that storm. The glass blades had been bad, but at least their heat had some control over where he put his feet, and could sometimes arrange safe things to stand on. With this sandstorm, it wasn't that way, and he had no such option. Wind-whipped sand abraded skin and exposed flesh. It caused only a very little damage compared to, say, a kunai thrust or a fireball, but shadow clones were not capable of sustaining any damage at all before dispersing. Since the storm covered virtually anywhere he might create them, they died the moment they came into existence. Dang it! I should have prepared more. Naruto shouted. Shove it! Anko rebuked him, eyes blazing as she wrapped her own injuries, trying to help out her regeneration so she could rejoin the fight when he was ready. Stupid Kishimoto had nearly wiped her out of the picture. We're ninja. Surprises are the aim of every operation. Both for us, and for our enemies. Even when we do everything correctly, sometimes they'll happen to us, like it or not. Deal with it. The pair of them were presently too wounded to fight effectively, so they'd been forced to take a short break to recover. Better a great deal of aid, slightly late, than being on time but no help at all. She looked out into the storm, and the giant summons battle. Besides, there was nothing more I can think of that you could have done. I could have set some traps. The boy grumbled, knowing that any shadow clone guards would have been popped by this sandstorm before they knew there was anything suspicious about it. Anko snorted. Sorry, kid. But any trap sensitive enough to go off on a ninja this storm would have triggered for you. We would have heard them going off and thought nothing of it, knowing the wind would do that. And if you set passive traps, shifting sands blown by those winds would have either buried or exposed them. You might as well dig pits in water as in that sand, the way the winds got it shifting and blowing about out there. She directed a kind smile to him, looking slightly odd on the face of such a hardened ninja. And what else could you have done? Set explosive tags. The wind would have torn them away in seconds. What could you attach them to so they wouldn't? Sand that's already blowing around. Or create great big rocks to stick them to. I'm sure those ninja native to this environment wouldn't have found anything suspicious about those. Face it, kid, you don't know how to trap a desert to catch Suna Shinobi. Neither do I. She crossed her arms and stared out into the storm. This was a peace envoy between allied villages, yet we had walls and guard towers, hidden huts and everything we knew how to do that did not go to ridiculously extreme lengths. If anything, we were over-prepared. They just knew how to trump everything we'd done. That's not our fault. It happens sometimes. Either you live with it and roll with the blow, or you don't. Her smile grew sad, and her expression serious. But, either way, eating yourself up over stuff you couldn't change doesn't make for a great ninja, kid. Only for a burnout. You've seen Kakashi. Classic burnout case, still wrapped up around events that occurred a long time ago. Don't go that route. In the time loops, we can change things like this. But we won't always have that ability. Learn how to accept things like this now, before it's too late. Konoha doesn't need another has-been Shinobi. Don't waste your potential, which is great, worrying over what might have been. Okay. An explosion occurred outside that shook their meager shelter, but Anko didn't even wince. We knew Snakeface was near Konoha, on his way to Sound, at the time we sent the messenger bird, so he shouldn't have been any place near where he'd have been able to prevent Suna from receiving it. Somehow he managed to do so and pull off this ambush anyway. That's an espionage triumph on his part, not a fault on ours. Anko thoughtfully tapped her lips. Although, that does prove that we haven't caught on to all of his spies yet. So, in a way, this victory is going to turn around and bite him, as we won't stop looking until we find whoever we missed on our previous sweeps. Naruto was crying, only part of that was grit in his eyes. Why did we use a bird? Why couldn't we just radio ahead? Do you know how to make a radio? She asked sternly. No. He was taken aback. No one does. She looked back out into the storm, arms crossed below her breasts. All of the technology we use is summoned, then we use it until it breaks. It all comes out of parallel dimensions or stuff, like your giant toads. No one knows how to create those things, and we don't exactly have good control over what we get, either. We just try to make do with what does arrive. Asking for reliable large-scale equipment networks made out of the patchwork stuff that does arrive is out of the question. About the best we can do is keep our batteries charged. Heck, half of what we summon are mismatched socks. Naruto scowled, finding he had a new goal. Raising his face to Anko, he broke into a grin. So, how do we get any stuff at all? Anko shrugged. Seal experts go fishing, designing scrolls asking for general concepts of give me something that does this, and has these qualities. Most of the time it's a stab in the dark. It's also expensive to try, and most of what does appear seems to depend on resources we don't have in order to function. So we tend to stick to simple basics, things we know from experience we can get, and don't get too adventurous. The last time a seal expert asked for an ultimate weapon, his village went up in a fireball so huge it formed a mushroom cloud that incinerated the entire province. Naruto's eyes had gone wide. His special Jonin bride smirked at this reaction, and supplied, every village has a couple of experts who do this full time, and we still don't have any idea how all this works. Most of the scrolls made don't even work to pull out stuff we know exists, so some have postulated an infinite number of parallel worlds, only some of which have any technology to summon. Ours certainly doesn't produce any, and there is no way of telling beforehand what world you're tapping into. But even the same scroll used by the same master won't grab the same thing every time he activates it. Things like those matched radio sets Kakashi gave Team 7 had to have cost him a fortune. She snorted disdainfully, uncrossing her arms and pushing away from the wall. But it wouldn't have done Sasuke any good to be the only one on the team with a short-range radio, now would it? That's it for this video, guys. I have decided to complete this story in 2 different seasons. And this is the end of Season 1 of What If Naruto Repeat the Chunin exams, and the Season 2 will be in this channel very soon, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, share and subscribe the channel if you like the video. Also tell me your recommendations in the comment section down below. See you next time.